Do you struggle with different relationships in your personal life? Do you find yourself scratching your head, trying to wonder why a person did such and such a behavior or why you did such and such a behavior? Do you wonder why some relationships end abruptly and are left guessing why it happened? Tune into today's video because today we're going to explore the question, what can you do to improve your relationships? Today we're going to explore attachment theory. Now, that sounds very dense and confusing, but in many ways, I promise you, it will enlighten how you view your relationships and give you some practical ways of exploring how you show up in relationships and how other people show up in relationships, and also give you some practical tools to help prevent some of the mysterious things that are happening in your personal life. Attachment theory was developed by two psychologists, Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby. And what they explored was different patterns that seem to happen in people's lives depending on the way they experienced the primary caregiver as they grew up. What they began to notice was this, that depending on the activity of that caregiver also influenced how people continue to act in relationships throughout their life. So what they found was that depending on how a caregiver responded to the needs, either you were hungry or you were tired or you needed love, really impacted future development and growth. And so what they found out was that there were three different attachment styles. So what are those three styles and how do they happen? The first is the secure attachment style. Now, when you were young, and if your primary caregiver most of the time was there for you when you had needs, they were met by your primary caregiver, then you develop this secure attachment. And that impacts about 56% of the population. The second attachment style is the anxious attachment style. So that developed because when you were younger, perhaps some of your needs were not consistently being met by the primary caregiver. So it was a little bit of hit and miss. Sometimes they were there, sometimes they were not. And so an anxious attachment style developed from that. That makes up about 20% of the population. And the third style is the avoidant attachment style. And this really explains situations in which children were forced with a situation that their primary caregiver really wasn't there for them. They had to fend by themselves. And that makes up about 26% of the population. So let's go through all three attachment styles and look at how they might show up in some of the relationships that you have in your personal life. The first is the secure attachment style. Now, people with a secure attachment style find forming relationships easier. They find that they are able to form deep and abiding relationships. They're able to be resilient and bounce back whenever there are setbacks. They're able to understand at times that they have to offer some more support, but at other times they have to push back, and they're able to do that. They're able as well to be more able to listen to another person and to understand perhaps things that are unique to them and things perhaps that are puzzling, and to be more curious about that rather than react. Now, we're not saying here that the secure attachment style are perfect people. Mistakes are made, of course, but people with a secure attachment style are able to own their mistakes, and they're constantly striving for self-improvement and to improve how they show up in a relationship. The second attachment style is the anxious attachment style. Now, here what we have is a person who is constantly worried about trusting the other person. Remember, we referred to this at the beginning. In their caregiving experience, what they found was that the caregiver was unreliable. Sometimes they were there, sometimes they were not. And that pattern has followed them as they move on to more adult relationships. And so they worry about trusting other people because they worry if that person is going to be there for them or if all of a sudden they will leave. And so they're constantly grasping for that other person. Now, if you're in a relationship with an anxious attachment style, sometimes you may experience that as being a little suffocating because the person's always wanting trust indicators, and always want to know that you're going to stick around, always want to know that you will be there for them. Sometimes the anxious attachment style has difficulty setting boundaries because distance can be a problem. If there's too much distance between themselves and the other person, that can pose a threat that perhaps the person will leave their lives totally. And so therefore, what happens is, of course, is their world meshes totally with the other world and causes what I've said before, so much of this suffocation. People with an anxious attachment style often feel anxious and perhaps guilty as well when they are away from their partner. So they'll experience that perhaps as a feeling of anxiety that the partner's going to wonder what they're doing. They feel guilty that they're not there. And so the inability to have space between each person in the relationship begins as well to cause problems. And so part of the learning process for a person with an anxious attachment style is to learn that so much of their behavior is based on what we call fight or flight. What they have to try and do is to integrate some practices that when they feel the impulse perhaps to want to become more attached to another person, to perhaps be clingy to another person or to self-doubt, that they can create a little bit of emotional distance that can help them introduce some new ways of thinking about what actually is happening in the relationship. And if you've liked the content of this video, I invite you to subscribe and to press the bell. Each week I strive to put out content around the area of emotional intelligence, which can help you in both your relationships at home and at work. So subscribe, press the bell. And the third attachment style is the avoidant attachment style. Now, you'll remember from the beginning that these people have become very successful in fending for themselves. And so in many ways, they can be weary of other people. They sometimes can reject another person when they try and come too close, because they're always comfortable in being independent. They're always comfortable in having an escape option just in case the relationship becomes too close. They can be uncomfortable with overly emotional people, and they prefer to have a much clear emotional distance rather than the emotions become entangled too much in the relationship. Sometimes what you'll find is that avoidant people will end relationships abruptly so that they can once again claim their independence because they feel threatened that their independence is under risk. And so if you've had a situation in the past where a person's just abruptly ended a relationship and you didn't see it coming, more than likely that person was an avoidant attachment style. Now, this is not to say that people with an avoidant attachment style don't need intimacy. They do. But unfortunately, the problem is that at times they just don't know how to get that intimacy without feeling threatened that their independence is at risk. And so part, therefore, of the learning curve for the avoidant style is an appreciation of the fact that people's desire for intimacy is not at the risk of losing your independence. That it's not full independence versus full intimacy, but rather there are different stages, and that their independence is not at risk just because another person wants to be more intimate or close to them. Relationships are not easy. And at times, people do things that just utterly baffle us. But hopefully today, through this attachment theory and the attachment styles, it's offered you some keys to understanding perhaps your own behavior or the behavior of others. Now, of course, in this short video, I can only scrape the surface of these attachment styles. But if you want to explore in depth what these attachment styles mean, and if you want to explore as well the possibility perhaps of changing your attachment style, because that's always a possibility. We can change from one style to the other. Then I invite you to explore a new course that we've just produced, which is called Why Do I Suck at Relationships? And in that course, we explore in depth the attachment styles, understanding your styles, also assessing which style you are, and then finally, how to change your style so that you can benefit and improve the relationships in your lives. If you'd like more information on that, see below. And if you've enjoyed this video, then I invite you to watch the next video, which looks at how we can improve our relationships at work.